when I reserved the spot to go into the Amazon rainforest, I made it very clear to the booking people at the agency that I would need to leave the tour a couple days early in order to get back to Cusco to get my flight. And they assured me, guaranteed me, that I'd be back in time. And when I sat there, while I was there, the woman, who was amazing, made like 12 phone calls, and she said, it's no problem, we're going to let you off in this little village. There's going to be a car waiting for you. It's going to take you to a slightly larger village. There's going to be a bigger car there, and you're going to drive the 7 hours from the middle of nowhere to Cusco overnight, no problem. What could go wrong? The tour was amazing. This isn't even part of the story, but it's so cool, I want to share it. There was one night in the middle of the rainforest where we went on a night hike, and we had turned off our flashlights, and we're just kind of trusting our guide to not kill us. And we got to the edge of what felt like a clearing, and he had us close our eyes and put our hands on each other's backs and sort of walk maybe another 100 yards. And then he turned us, and he told us all at once to open our eyes. And it looked pitch dark, and then thousands of fireflies lit up. And it was one of the most beautiful things I'd ever seen. And with experience like that, I was sad to leave the group 2 days early, but I knew it had to happen, and so sure enough, we got to the little town that I'd been told about. We sort of puttered up on a motorboat, got out. Do y'all think there was a car waiting for me? No, that's right, there was no car. So the guide stayed and talked to the woman who appeared to be like the grandmother of the village, and she yelled, and this 17-year-old kid named Juanito came out, and he had a rat tail, and like his legs were all scarred up, which I didn't think much of at that moment. And they put their heads together, and they chatted for a bit, and then Juanito gestured me over, and he took me to what I would lovingly describe as a bright red death rocket. It was like a little dirt bike. And he pointed to it and told me we would be riding it to the other village. This whole trip, I'd been in Peru for about a month, and the whole thing had unfolded so organically and beautifully. It'd been so lucky. And I actually had a hat I'd been traveling with that said "Lucky" on it, and I was wearing it. So I looked at Juanito, I looked at his legs, which I put two and two together. He had fallen off of the death rocket lots of times. That's what had happened. And I went, as long as I have my hat, this is going to be fine. So Juanito got excited. He siphoned some gas from a nearby car, put it in the death rocket, and then I strapped my bag to my back, held on for dear life, and away we went. Within 3 minutes, my lucky hat flew off. And that is when I remembered all of the stories of white tourists disappearing in South America, right? And I realized nobody knew where I was. That if we fell off the road, which is like if you've been in the jungle, you know roads are like maybe this wide, nobody would ever know. And Juanito's loving life right now. He's like swerving around potholes, and I'm just trying to remind myself to keep breathing. And finally we get to the slightly larger village where there was supposed to be a car waiting for me. Do you think there was a car waiting for me? No. Absolutely no car. So Juanito and I talk for a second. And I'm like, I have an idea. There are lots of tour buses going back to Cusco. Let's chase them, and I'll yell out to them, Tengo que irme a Cusco, vas a Cusco, and because I'm white and have privilege, they will stop and let me on. So we do it. He is going like 55 kilometers, like fast, and we're chasing these buses, and I'm waving like a madman, and the buses speed up. They don't even think of stopping, and like we get covered in dust. And after about an hour of this, we go back to the town, and I thank Juanito for his help. And I talk to some people, and they say there's going to be no cars around for at least 3 days. And I realize I'm stranded in the middle of the Amazon. And I'm making calculations in my head. If I could find internet somewhere at some point, I can probably cancel my ticket. Like, there are worse places to be stranded. Everyone is super friendly. And that is when I hear the crunch of tires on gravel. And I look over, and I see something that has no business being in the rainforest. It's a large, like, suburban SUV. Bright black, like totally clean. And now every story I've heard of white tourists being kidnapped and held for ransom goes through my head. And so I sit against the wall, and I kind of look as if I'm not noticing this SUV, and it's creeping along as if it's looking for someone, and it stops right next to me. And the window rolls down, and this friendly-looking guy leans out and goes, "Are you Michael?" And I realize that there is like an underground network of tour operators, and word has gotten out that there is a stranded gringo. And he tells me that everything's going to be fine. If he has to, he will leave his group there and he's going to drive me back to Cusco. But first, let's try to find a cab driver. And I didn't even know there were cab drivers there. So this is great. We drive around for like an hour and a half. He finally finds someone, does some complex negotiation, tells me not to give the guy any extra money. Now, at this point, it's 5 p.m. And he looks at me and he goes, "You're not leaving till 9. Everything is fine." Cool. So I wait 4 hours. The cab driver comes out, and the cab has kind of like a cracked windshield. Its undercarriage is very low. The tire pressure doesn't look great, but the tour guy had seemed so nice. I sit, and the chair's kind of loose. You know, it's a janky cab. It's not meant for these long journeys that we're about to take. So we get in the cab, talk to the cab driver a little bit. He has a family. It's fine that he's going to Cusco because he has a son there. And he starts playing a tape of Peruvian music, like flutes and Andean stuff. And after about an hour, I realized this is the only music he has. And it just keeps playing on a loop. And about hour 2, we get stopped by the cops for the first time. And as we get stopped, he looks a little concerned and very specifically says, "Do not get out of the cab. Do not move." The cops trash the cab. They turn over everything. I don't know what they're looking for. But they don't touch me because they don't want to get in trouble with the American government. Or whatever. As we get going again, I notice that my seat is shifted a little more, and I look beneath me, and under my seat is 5 or 6 huge trash bags filled with coca leaves, which are legal but highly regulated in Peru. So I'm kind of helping smuggle semi-illicit drugs. And the guy apologizes, and I'm like, "Oh, this explains why we had to leave late at night. No problem. This is great." Meanwhile, he's getting sleepy, because now it's almost midnight. He's chewing coca leaves, which is a light stimulant. And there's a moment where he almost drives off a cliff, would be the nice way to put it. And I stop him. We jointly have to push the car back onto the road. And now we're both terrified. And it's getting colder and colder and colder. And we get pulled over by 3 more sets of cops, each of which just trashes the cab. Finally, we get an hour from Cusco. At this point, the cab has no heat. I have frostbite. I think, "Oh, I would rather be on Juanito's death bike than in this cab." That music is just playing incessantly in my head. And as we emerge from the jungle and move towards Cusco, he stops the cab, gets out, and tells me that we have to clean it. We have to wash it. And so we sit there for 30 minutes and scrub the cab so it looks like we haven't been in the jungle. And then there's just one thing standing between us and Cusco. At this point, it's 3:30 in the morning, and it is a gigantic police checkpoint. So sure enough, they pull us over. He tells me to stay in the cab. They take him inside, and he is gone for 20 minutes, 25 minutes. And I'm like, okay, I can bribe the cops to get him out because, again, I've seen this in movies. You bribe the cops to free your drug smuggling cab driver. Everyone does this. But finally, he comes back, gets in the cab, and just looks angry at me. And we talk, and it turns out his problem wasn't the drugs. It was he didn't have a license to carry a tourist. And so all the money that he'd made from carrying me went right back to the cops. So we get to Cusco at 5:30 in the morning. My flight is leaving at 8, and I say goodbye to my friend, the cab driver. He doesn't even say anything to me because he's so pissed off. And I go sleep on a park bench. And as I fall asleep, I realize that the tour operator I'd originally negotiated with totally kept her word and her guarantee that I would make it to Cusco in time for my flight. Thanks.